that, let's welcome our first speaker. So Dr. Alyce Martin, she's an ARC DECRA Fellow in the College of Medicine and Public Health and Flinders Health and Medical Research Institute at Flinders University. She's also a member of our Grounded Minds Consortium, and she's won lots of awards, and her research centres around understanding hormone-producing cells in the gut, with a particular interest in serotonin-producing what's called enterochromaffin cells. So she uses her specialist skills in gut endocrinology to examine how these cells sense the unique environment of the gut, including dietary nutrients and bacteria, and how this impacts gut function, metabolism, fat storage, and gut-brain signaling. So without further ado, over to you, Alyce. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome everybody to this amazing series on Soil Yourself September. I'm so excited to be the first speaker in this great lineup. So I first want to also acknowledge that we are gathered, or I'm presenting this on Ghana land, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our country and recognise the continuing connections to the land, waters and communities. And I want to pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to their elders past and present. So I first really want to introduce you to my amazing team who are vital parts of the work that I'm going to be showing you today. You can visit us on our website, amartingutlab.com.au. So a lot of the work that I'll be showing you today, especially from our lab, is from my amazing PhD student Jessica Chow and my former research assistant Rosie, who's now gone on to do a PhD. So we are very fortunate to be housed in this amazing new health and medical research building at Flinders, which sits right alongside the Flinders Medical Centre, where we can collaborate really closely with clinicians to access human tissue for a lot of our work. And our broad research goals are to really understand how our diet and our gut microbiome interact together in a really complex environment to control our health and well-being. And we do that in a number of different ways. We look at things like how the cells sense and respond to different signals within the gut, how these signals control the release of various hormones within the gut, and then what implications this has on our broader physiology. So our gut health is incredibly important for so many different things. It maintains our immune system, as well as affects it's vital for our digestion. We can't digest food without our gut and without a healthy gut. It affects our sleep patterns, our metabolic health, but also has big impacts on our mental health, and that is really an emerging and very exciting field. So I want to first take you through, and this is going to be a complex slide, but this is what the digestive system of a human comprises of. There are many different parts of the intestinal tract that do a number of different functions. They have really specialized regions that are involved, for example, the stomach, which is involved in really the chemical digestion and breakdown of food that moves along to our small and large intestine, where in our small intestine, most of our nutrients are actually absorbed. When it gets to the large intestine, we have a lot of different processes that are heavily involving gut bacteria, as well as the absorption of water. And this is where our fecal content are really created and then expelled. Before I continue, I also want to do an exclaimer. I have a very noisy dog, a corgi, and a toddler. So if you hear background noises, don't worry about it. So by now you would have had your dinner or your lunch, breakfast if you're in the UK. So I want to take you inside of your gut right now. Take yourself into your digestive tract. Have a think about what is going on with the food that you've just eaten. So this is basically what the inside of your small intestine looks like right now. What you see here, and I'll just keep playing this video, you see this mechanical grinding, churning, and propulsion of food bacteria, water along the gut. You also have bacteria and anything that you have ingested through your mouth and through your passing through your esophagus into your stomach. All of the nutrients that you've consumed, this really complex mix or like a soup is constantly flowing through your intestine. And what you see here, these funny little blobs, if you can see here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, these finger-like projections contain a single lining of cells that have direct exposure to anything that goes through your intestine. And this is really important because it's basically it's an interface between our external environment that comes into our body and the rest of our body, all of our other organs and functional processes. Now, within this lining, what you see here, you can see the lumen is what we call the internal part of the gut, so where all our bugs and bacteria and nutrients are. This single lining of cells have a number of different cell types that are really, really important to the function of not just the gut, but all the processes in our body. Now, a really specialized cell type that I'm really interested in that has a really important function are these hormone-producing enteroendocrine cells. So it's a complex name, but if you break it down, entero is what we refer to as the gut. So entero just means gut, and endocrine is hormone. So it's essentially meaning gut hormone cell. Now, these cells are really complex to study because they exist as scattered individual cells amidst a whole bunch of other cell types along the entire length of the gut. And they make up a large number, they actually make and release a large number of different hormones, and we can categorize what type of cells they are largely based on what type of hormone they make. Now, about half of all of these enteroendocrine cells are cells that are specialized in making serotonin. And why that's interesting, why I love that so much, is because the gut is actually responsible for making around 95% of all of the serotonin in our body. So this particular population of cells is incredibly important. But collectively, these cells really make the gut the largest hormone-producing organ in the body. Now, why these hormones are really, I think, important to study is because they play vital roles in things like maintaining the health of our intestine. So that we know that serotonin especially helps regulate the motility or the propulsion of contents along our gut, how the gut actually works to digest and expel nutrients, as well as maintaining things like the intestinal barrier and protection from pathogens. They also affect the absorption of nutrients across the gut into our circulation for distribution to the rest of the body. But we also have really significant emerging results showing they have really important roles in metabolism and appetite regulation, things like immunity responses, as well as gut-brain signaling through this thing called the gut-brain axis. Now, I've listed some of the hormones here. An example that you might be more familiar with is this incretin system, and especially in the context of obesity and wanting to lose weight or diabetes treatment, we have these two hormones called GIP or gastrointestinal peptide and GLP-1. So GLP-1, you may have heard of Ozempic. That is actually a target for this incretin system. And what these hormones do are regulate processes such as insulin secretion or glucagon secretion to help maintain our blood glucose, but they also act via the gut-brain axis to regulate the intake of our food and whether or not we feel nauseous. And they've also been really critical in the treatment of obesity or weight loss. So that's an example of a couple of different hormones. For the sake of time, I won't go through all of them, but I will say that what we have been looking at over the last decade, I've been looking at this, is how these hormones are released from the gut. What controls the release of these hormones and what regulates the functional biology of the cells that make these hormones? And a lot of that has been focused on serotonin. But what we do know, and I've highlighted my papers in purple, I can give you the references for those later. But what we do know now is that enteroendocrine cells, or these hormone-producing cells, are really key sensory cells within the gut. They sense and respond to things like nutrients, all the dietary nutrients and sugars and fats that we consume. And they are heavily impacted by changes in our diet. So if we shift from a low-fat diet to a high-fat diet, or a low-sugar to a high-sugar diet, they are very responsive to these changes. They are also responsive to the mechanical action of our gut. So if we have movement of our gut to contract down and move our nutrients, they sense this mechanical stimulation and grinding of our gut and release their content. We also know that they contain a lot of the receptors that are responsible for SARS-CoV-2, so COVID infection. So they are able to detect viruses as well as bacteria. So a lot of the work that we're moving into now in this space is seeing how these cells actually sense and respond to the presence of our gut microbiome and changes in our gut microbiome. So the overarching question that we have in the lab, and the one that I'm super passionate about, is how do these interactions between our diet and our gut microbiome impact our overall health and well-being? And I've just taken the example here of I am a big fan of donuts because I think the gut just basically resembles a big donut. And, you know, how can you resist a donut? So we know that things like donuts, which are high fat, high sugar, affect our fat storage and can lead to things like obesity and diabetes. But what I'm interested in is, how does this occur via the interaction with these enteroendocrine cells? So I first, before going forward, want to take you through a bit about getting to know your gut microbiota. So this is a really busy slide, but I will take you through it. So when we're talking about the gut microbiota and gut microbiome, they're two different things. When we refer to the gut microbiota, we're actually referring to the individual bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa. And when we refer to the microbiome, this is collectively with their genetic traits. So you'll probably see gut microbiome will be the terminology I'm using for the rest of the talk. But why it's so fascinating is because our gut microbiome makes a huge part of who we are. It's basically like our fingerprint. Each person's microbiome is substantially different, and you can pinpoint who it is based on the complexity and diversity of their gut microbiome. They make up a big part of our body in terms of the number of cells within us and actually our weight. So about 200 grams per 70 kilo person is made up of bacteria, so the size of a mango, right? They are a huge community within us and make up the most densely populated microbial ecosystem on the earth. And they play such a huge role in actually making vitamins for us, such as B12, potassium, folate. They defend against harmful microorganisms. They actually help train and teach our immune system to respond to things like vaccinations. And Fergal Ryan has been an amazing researcher in this space, showing that bacteria and the diversity, like the actual microbiome, is responsible to how infants respond to injections and vaccinations and their immune responses. So they do all these different things and they're absolutely amazing, but they're also really well adapted to changes in our environment. So I've listed here some of those changes, such as diet has a big impact, pharmaceuticals, drugs that we take, medications such as antibiotics, obviously have a big impact on our gut microbiome, but also geography. So there's been a few really, really interesting studies showing that if you people that migrate from one country to another, such as Europe to America, have a big shift in their gut microbiome, and that is largely responsible to their environment and the diet that they have. Also, things like life cycle stages can, so a young versus elderly person will have a different microbiota profile. Birthing process, such as how an infant is born by vaginal or C-section and how it's fed, but also things like stresses. We're in a constant stressed psychological stress state that's shown to affect our microbiome, as well as if we're exercise or not. So they're very, very well adapted to changes. But what we do know is that the diet has a massive effect on our gut microbiome. I've just shown a few examples here of different types of diets. So things like Mediterranean, high fiber, plant-based, high protein, a keto, so high fat, or a Western diet. So I don't want you to pay too much attention to the bottom part, but I'll just summarize it and say that different dietary compounds and makeups have a huge effect on particularly the diversity and richness of our gut microbiome. So when I say diversity, I mean how many different types of bacteria we have in our microbial ecosystem and how well adapted they are to break down different nutrients. Now, what we do know is that if plant-based versus meat-based, they have particular microbiome profiles that are really well adapted to breaking down those specific nutrients. If we have an obesogenic or a Western diet, that microbial shift is more for energy harvesting, to be able to harvest all the energy that we need from our food. So it's a very adaptable, our microbial ecosystem is very adaptable to our diet. So what these bacteria actually do are use the nutrients of our diet as an energy source for their survival, but they also produce what we call bioactive metabolites through this process. Now, these metabolites, and there's heaps of them, very much dictated by what their starting material is, or what nutrient that starts with. These metabolites, I call them bioactive because they can be absorbed by ourselves as energy, but they can also act as signaling molecules within the gut. Now, why all of this is incredibly important is because the microbiome itself and just the characteristics of a microbiome have been shown to cause fat accumulation in a mouse model. I love this study so much because it's really, really showing that our microbiome plays a definitive role in our health. So what this study's done is taken twins who are genetically identical, except one is lean and one is obese. They've taken the microbiota from those individuals and put them into germ-free mice. So these are mice that don't have any bacteria. Now, what they found is that if you keep mice on a low-fat, high-fiber diet, so we consider a healthy diet, the mouse that received a microbiome from an obese human actually gained a lot more weight than that from the mouse that had the lean microbiome. So we've also seen in the lab, and I'm going to show you some data from my amazing Jessica Chow PhD student. This is unpublished, but we've also seen this when we've given antibiotics alongside a high-fat diet. So wiping out all of the bacteria in our gut and then giving a high-fat diet, it actually protects from diet-driven obesity and metabolic disease, but also reduces our appetite and ability to consume more calories and want more calories when we have a high-fat diet. So collectively, we know that diet-driven changes to our gut microbiome cause obesity when we have a high-fat diet. And this is due to the effect on the ability of our gut to absorb our nutrients. So our gut microbiome really plays a critical role in how our cells within the gut affect the absorption of things like fats, for example. Now, I'll just take you through this here. What we see at the top is when we have a high-fat diet, with the presence of the microbiome, absorption of fat in the small intestine in our upper gut is increased. It wants to absorb more fat. But when we don't have bacteria there, we don't have this absorption of fat in the small intestine, and it stays in our gut for longer. So this is really new, really, really exciting data that we have. And we're exploring this more using an amazing approach called intestinal organoids. So I'm going to show you some very brief data that we're looking at with what we call mini guts. So the picture that you see here is not generated by AI. I love this image because this is showing you an actual small intestinal organoid. This is a 3D structure that we grow in a dish that very closely resembles an actual gut. So the one that you see on the slide here is a gut of the small intestine, and the blobby finger-like bits contain all of the different cells that our gut would normally have. So things like absorptive cells and secretory cells and all these gut hormone cells. So we're using this really cool technology now to understand how different types of bacteria, the things that bacteria make, as well as different types of nutrients, how they really impact the gut at a single cell level and the development of this actual machinery. So what you see on the slide here, we did a really great experiment where we took a number of different, this is just showing you examples of sugars. We took a number of different sugars and artificial sweeteners and put them on these organoids to see what would happen. Up the top, we've got our normal, just plain organoid. We have next to it one that was given equal the artificial sweetener that you might often pop in your cup of tea. We also have fructose, which is in a lot of apples, but also added in a lot of high sugar foods, as well as lactose. So lactose is, you can see find it in things like milk, but lactose is also one of these metabolites from the gut bacteria. Now, I don't need to point it out. We can see a really big differences in how these organoids look and how they've grown. And Rosie has done a lot of analysis, especially looking at these cells that make serotonin. We see that when we have artificial sweeteners, the number of cells that make serotonin is increased. So with these different nutrients and artificial sweeteners and sugars have effects on the amount of or number of cells that make hormones in our gut, but also the growth of the organoid itself. So whether or not we have cells being turned over and renewed, and the differentiation, what we call the differentiation of all these different cell types. So we see big impacts on the ability of our gut to maintain its cellular architecture and function. So now I just want to draw you back once again to the inside of your gut right now and taking in the context of some of the data and some of the things we've just taken you through. So hopefully you have a little bit more of an appreciation right now for what is going on with the gut and thinking about within each of these finger-like projections, you have, all of these different cells and these hormone-producing cells that are sensing their really unique and complex environment. Now, of course, being Soil Yourself September and part of the Grounded Minds Consortium, I want to finish exploring a little bit on the soil gut brain axis. So this concept of soil affecting our gut and then affecting our brain. And the thing I want to propose to you is that when we have really sustained management of produce, nutrient-rich, when we have sustainable management to produce nutrient-rich soil, so when the density of and diversity of microbes and soil health is maintained, we have a really big impact on the quality of food that we produce and consume. So this is food that has a more diverse range of and larger concentration of nutrients that have a big impact on the diversity and richness of our gut microbiome, and so our overall microbial health within our gut. Now, why this is really important is because we have this direct interaction with the cells that are lining our gut to regulate intestinal function, our metabolic health, as well as signaling through the gut-brain axis to regulate things like our mood. So this whole, it's not just one thing affecting the other. This is all bidirectional as well. We have this really, starting from the ground up, this huge effect of soil quality affecting food quality, affecting our health. I'm sure you'll also hear from a few people talking about this aerobiome as well, and just our interaction with nature in general, because we know if people that go out into soil, into nature, play with soil, play with trees, leaves, that all impacts our gut microbiota as well. So I'm going to finish with acknowledging all of the people that have contributed to this work, but also my career so far, especially my mentor Damien Keating and everyone in my lab. I also want to thank everyone in the Grounded Minds Consortium, and thank you all very much for joining in, for listening. I will now take questions.
Thanks, Alice. That was amazing. Very great start to the series. Do we have any questions in the chat? Anyone want to add your questions in the chat? That'd be great. I just had one. So, for organoids, I assume the main advantage is that they avoid kind of cross-species differences. So you can be human specific, and obviously they're more ethical than using mouse models. But are there other advantages?
I think it's approach, but you can do a lot more with an organoid, obviously, than you can with a human. You can use them for really high throughput screening of different interventions. You can tweak parts of the cells within these organoids so that you can really try and understand the biology a lot more. So
yeah, cool.
They're very much simplified approach to looking at this really complicated system, but I think you definitely need that to really pull apart what's going on.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks. We have another one from Fergal. Any thoughts on the implications for the gut-brain axis on if we start seeing wide population use of GLP-1 drugs?
Oh, it's a good question. What do you think about that one? We know that, there's definitely a bidirectional, I'm bringing this back to microbiome space as well. We definitely know that there's bidirectional interaction between medication or especially hormone specific medication and the gut microbiome. Whether or not the gut brain constant use of this GLP-1 affects the gut brain and the nerves itself within the gut brain axis and the sensitivity of that pathway. I'm not 100% sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if you think about the context of, and I know this is like very brain specific, but use of antidepressants as an example, or other drugs that you build up a tolerance to. I would be surprised that there would be a bit of a tolerance build up to GLP-1 drugs, and how that would affect the gut-brain axis. I'm not 100% sure, but those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you. Any more
We have
questions?
another one. Yeah.
So it looks like the microbiome of the Mediterranean diet was most diverse. Is that correct? And does this have an influence on digestion?
Yeah, 100%. So the Mediterranean diet has been really, like, there's a lot of interest in it now, because especially in the space of mental health. So there's a lot of work from the Food and Mood Center looking at how the Mediterranean diet specifically can affect your mental health. But certainly the nutrients within that diet, because there is a lot of diversity within the nutrients and the bacteria themselves, it does have a big influence on digestion, because the more diversity you have in bacteria, the more genetic diversity you have, and with that you have an increased ability to break down different types of nutrients. So they just have this, I guess, better machinery, collectively better machinery to digest a diversity of different nutrients versus someone that has just a plant-based diet or just a meat-based diet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So is the term like Mediterranean, is that more just of a heuristic term to kind of
I think so.
encompass
I think
diversity in the diet rather than it being some sort of geographically specific diet?
Well, I mean, I think it's Mediterranean diet because it's typically the diet that you see Mediterraneans eat, and it's attributed a lot to their longevity and just being happier and that sort of thing. So I think that's where the name comes from.
Yeah,
Mediterranean. But yeah, I mean,
it's just a kind of shortcut for diversity in your diet, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool, thank you. Are there significant changes in the gut microbiome of women who are perimenopausal/menopausal and using HRT? If so, can implementing a particular diet potentially modulate these changes?
Oh, that's a really good question. I cannot be sure of my response to that. I'm 100% sure about the effects of menopause and hormone replacement therapy, but I think, you know, our microbiome can be. I'm trying to think about how to answer this properly without leading anyone on. Certainly, I think hormonal changes within the body have an effect on our gut lining. We know that in women, at least in animal studies, the hormonal changes that go through like menstrual cycle or estrous cycle have a big impact on the number and amount of at least serotonin producing cells, and so that fluctuates. Whether or not that also occurs with perimenopause or menopause, people haven't really looked at that, but I think if that would be the case, if there are these fluctuations or changes in hormones within the gut, yeah, having a diet that shifts your microbiota to affect these different hormones in like an inverse way, there's potential. But it's really, I think what we need to appreciate is that it's such a complex system that we don't fully understand yet. We really are tip of the iceberg kind of stuff when it comes to this and the interactions that it has in that setting, at least.
Okay. So you might have to kind of double down on the diversity of foods that you eat just to make sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think having a more diverse and rich diet anyway is
Yeah.
of significant benefit.
Yeah.
There are also, I know, there are also avenues for having your own microbiome tested.
Mm.
I think that's through a clinical space, but you can, if you're going to see a clinician, and you can engage microbiome testing if you are curious about what your microbiome looks like. And you can then implement dietary strategies based on that profile. And this is really where we get into the concept of personalized medicine. So this is becoming a big space in personalized medicine, where you can tailor your diet based on your microbiome, and then see, okay, if I, as an example, I've done this, I've experimented on myself and, taken lactose out of my diet and saw a big shift in my microbiome. Whether or not that has big, health consequences, you know, for some people it may, for some people it may not, but yeah, I think that's really the future of using a microbiome in a treatment strategy, is where this personalized medicine comes into play.
Yeah, thanks. Next question is, what are your thoughts on fecal transplant therapy for gut-related issues? Will this be the future of mental health medicine?
I want to say yes. So we actually have, so fecal microbiome transplants are actually being used in a clinical setting for C. diff, so Clostridium difficile infection, where yeah, like you have this C. diff infection and you have real issues with your gut that can't be treated any other way. So they are in the clinic doing these transplants and seeing a really um, amazing remission to these patients. So their gut just works. There is also moving towards treating metabolic disease, obesity and metabolic disease with fecal microbiota transplants. But in relation to mental health, I can't remember their names. My supervisor Damien will know this, so please chuck it in the chat, Damien. But there is an Australian couple. She
Mm.
has had incredible troubles with bipolar disorder, and it was basically, I think, one of their last resorts. They wanted to do a fecal microbiome transplant from the husband, who was mentally well. And I think they actually did this in their kitchen, where they did an at-home fecal microbiome transplant. And amazingly, the quality of life for her, she was basically cured of bipolar disorder and no longer required lithium, and it basically saved her life. So I certainly think there is merit, and we have some really exciting, hopefully published soon, data certainly showing that the gut plays a massive role in bipolar disorder and maintaining mental health. So yeah, I would say that, yeah, FMT, way to go if it is clinically relevant, and there is no other way of
Yeah.
treating it. Because I mean, FMT, what we think is FMT or fecal microbiome transplant have their own risks. Like, people have died from an FMT before. So it has to be done in a really safe clinical setting, and you absolutely have to screen the donor patients as well. And it's an organ transplant, basically. You're transplanting your microbiome as an organ into somebody else. So you have to treat it like an organ transplant as well. So don't do it at home.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Have you got any thoughts on a more holistic approach to that? So, we're kind of thinking along the lines of using these therapies, but what if the answer is to, have a more diverse diet and more diverse environmental exposures from a young age, etc., to,
Yeah,
see the human
I
microbiome?
100% think so. And I've been extremely conscious of this since I have a toddler. I have a 1.5-year-old, and And it's become, yeah, certainly at the forefront of my mind. When we have exposure to a diverse range of environments, different foods, cultures, nutrients, environment, everything, it does ultimately have a big impact on,
Yeah.
and from a young age, like, because when we're young, and especially I think it's up to the age of 5, our gut
Yeah.
microbiome is still growing and developing and maturing, and it's those critical,
Exactly.
that window that really helps shape a number of our processes, like our immune responses.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we
Yeah.
can get on that
I'm just a
bandwagon
little
early.
concerned, exactly a little concerned we're putting all our effort into reactive kind of biomedical models of
Yeah,
health rather
yeah,
than the proactive health models.
100%.
So
Yeah, yeah,
it's all important, but
yeah. And I
uh,
also think we have this, this push for ultra cleanness as
yeah,
well. Like
yeah,
this push of ultra clean. We have to be ultra clean with a lot of, when we're using our small animal models, there is such a thing as being too clean. Um, it really impacts your richness and diversity of your microbiome if you are too clean. Um, yeah, and that can have long lasting effects on our health, I think.
Hmm. Thank you. Next question. Can we conclude that the microbiome of an obese person absorbs more fat than a non-obese person out of the same meal?
So I don't think the microbiome doesn't absorb the fatness, doesn't absorb the fat itself. So what it can do is, so we know the microbiome and indeed hormones within the gut affect the release of bile acids from the liver. So what happens when we have an obese microbiome? They have a greater capacity to increase and harvest the energy from the nutrients. But we also know that with an obese person, with more fat, you have more fat available for these bile acids to then try and digest. But along with that, the more bile acids you have, the bacteria actually harness these bile acids to make secondary bile acids as a energy source for our body, but also as a signaling molecule. So collectively, that is how they increased fat absorption. But yeah, it's definitely more than what a non-obese would have, I think.
Hmm. Thanks. So are there endocrine microbiome interactions, do they differ along different parts of the gut, or is it?
Yeah, I absolutely would expect them to.
Yeah.
So, and I think the reason why you have to take each unique region of the gut within its own environmental context is because they're so different.
Hmm.
So in the large intestine, you see a huge abundance of bacteria, but the types of bacteria that you see are going to differ quite a lot to what you see in the small intestine.
Mhm.
And that's because, they think of them as their own environments, basically. Even though it's connected as one long tube, and it's all the gut, each is its own little house of activity. So,
Yeah.
yeah, certainly the interactions that you see in each region are going to be quite unique, I reckon.
Okay, cool. Thanks. A couple more. Is there any role for direct healthy soil to gut connection? For example, one of my kids ate dirt, bush property, so no contamination, and the other child didn't. The one that ate dirt as a kid had a great immune system, and the other doesn't. Sorry, I'm not reading this very well. I've always wondered whether we should all eat some soil, which is also known as it's also known as geophagy, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I've definitely, my daughter goes and eats sand in the sand pit, and I'm like, oh no, she shouldn't be doing that. Oh my gosh, no, oh no, it's fine. It's good for her microbiome. It's okay.
Maybe.
I mean, I certainly think as a kid, if you're exposed to a number of different things, your immune system is exposed to more things. So you're going to
Yeah.
build up that tolerance at an earlier age. And I guess it's the same for, you know, they say, it's the same for washing veggies. that come out of the ground. You know, if you scrub the life out of them trying to wash them, you know, you're losing that microbiome that's on the surface. I'm not saying go eat a dirty potato, but you know what I mean. If you clean it too much, you do lose that microbial ecosystem that's within the soil.
Yeah.
That then, you know, can impact your own microbiome system or community.
Yeah,
So yeah,
thanks.
let them eat dirt. Go on.
Yeah, I often say that in my talks. I often say, yeah, ideally, you should be eating a little bit of dirt, but actually, there's a bit of a caveat to that nowadays because we've kind of polluted the dirt, the soil
Well,
so
that's it.
so
Now,
much that you don't actually know what you're consuming, like
yeah, well,
with
that's part of the
cadmium and
problem.
lead and etc.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
if you know
exactly.
it's not full of pollutants,
If
then
it's good
tuck
soil,
in. Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Where are we? Can altering the microbiome improve autoimmune diseases?
um, I don't know if there's any definitive answer for that yet. I think it's still a work in progress field.
Yeah.
I think we have conditions such as Crohn's disease, which is a disease of the gut where I think it's kind of kind of attacks itself.
Yeah.
You know, there is some evidence that altering the microbiome may have improvements to that, but it's all still very much in a research
Yeah.
phase.
Yeah, I think I agree. So it's like it's often implicated. So the microbiome is often implicated in autoimmune diseases, but we're
Yeah,
still at
yeah,
early stages.
yeah, definitely.
Okay. Any final questions before we let Alice go to bed?
All right, my daughter's still awake.
Good.
Probably eating dirt. Who knows?
Yeah. I think that's it, Alice.
Well,
Quite a lot
okay.
of questions there. Some nice
Yeah,
questions.
no, thank you so much. It's always a great discussion. I think it's definitely something we should keep in mind. Like like going to the supermarket versus going to a farmer's market, as an example. You know,
Yeah,
there
exactly.
are everyday choices that we can make that aren't a huge burden on just trying to eat healthier
Yeah.
and make smarter choices. Um, I need to do that as well. Like, do I want to go for the you know slightly dirty potatoes at the supermarket versus the prepackaged, heavily washed ones? You know,
Yeah,
these
exactly.
small things, to keep in mind.
Cool. Thank you, Alice. Round of applause, everybody. Well done.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for
And
kicking us off as well for this series. So there'll be a
yeah,
couple
no,
more talks
pleasure.
tomorrow. I'll just put them in the chat. So the first one is by Ellie Court. So he's from Soils for Life. Sorry, he's just talking mostly about soil, how it's not dirt, and how it's all wonderful. There's a universe in the soil that we don't really know about. And then Stephen Allender is a systems thinking professor and expert. He's going to be talking about community food system thinking. So, kind of things like what factors that shape healthy, sustainable foods and how do you transform something as complex as a food system. So, that's super interesting as well. So, I hope you can join us tomorrow. And yeah, click on those links and book your free tickets. And we'll see you for the rest of the series. Thank you, everybody.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night or morning, depending on where you are.
See ya.
Bye.